Welcome to the Family Office Sherpa podcast. I'm your host, Shaun Parkin, founder and managing director of Whole Road Investments. The aim of this podcast is to provide practical and implementable advice for those looking to build, manage, or service a family office. This is not, however, investment advice, so please check the disclaimer in the show notes. In this episode, we are covering overcoming decision paralysis within the family office.
This is the Family Office Sherpa.
Now, this topic is very top of mind for a lot of family office that I speak to, as it's one of the biggest risks, but also one of the most qualitative risks. Like when I say that, it's one of those risks that is very hard to quantify where the risk is and what the mitigation strategy is, which is really what affects their number one concern, which is family harmony and really the ability to manage their assets for the next generation. It's the inability to make decisions, to have someone say, this is what we're doing, this is where we're going, this is the next steps, this is, all those kinds of things. Those things where you go through a process. This is incredibly difficult, hence why the term paralysis. Now, we've all heard things like analysis paralysis and all this sort of stuff, and it's all very true. There's families that I know that are, considering wholesale changes to operating infrastructure and things like that, or selling the business, or whatever it ends up looking like. But making the decisions is incredibly difficult, especially when it's such an idiosyncratic thing. It's such a personal thing. And there's more than one stakeholder. And when stakeholders are family members, it becomes even more challenging. So I think this is a really interesting topic. I think it's very front of mind. Hopefully this is helpful. Now, it's especially true, I find anyway, with first generation offices, but the risk of not making important decisions around the future of the office is present in all offices. There are ways to mitigate this risk, however, and I've seen how families have faced this head on and really made a big difference. So what we'll do today is we're going to go through the risks that I see across family, investments, and counterparties. And then I'll provide some ways of seeing family offices or families overcome, or at least start the process of mitigating these risks. So what are the main risks of doing nothing? From a family perspective, conflict and uncertainty. That's what indecision tends to breed. A lack of decisions can create friction. When people are uncertain, it creates friction among family members and between generations. That's what happens when decisions aren't made. We're not moving forward. We're going backwards. We're going side or whatever, right? So it's those lack of decision-making processes can cause conflict and uncertainty. The other thing it does is it creates a loss of continuity. If there's no clear strategy for things like succession, governance, one of my personal favorites, or value alignment. In the previous episodes, we talked about the purpose document. If that's not in place, there's that loss of continuity. So we're not sure where it's going. Does it match up with where we've been? Does it match up with where we want to go? And the third one, which is a major one, which is wealth dilution. Inaction on estate planning. And we've all, you can read about some of the horror stories around estate planning or lack of estate planning. It can lead to a really inefficient, what they call wealth transfer. Everyone's talking about this great transition of wealth, right? If there's not decisions and processes put in place and it's ineffective, it becomes really inefficient and also creates tax leakage. Things like prior planning for estate planning means that there's efficiencies on tax. And that's a really specific thing, but that's a really important thing. So that's from the family point of view. From the investment point of view, if there's no decisions, there's no process around it, then you miss out on opportunities. One of the things around an investment policy statement, if you haven't got one in place, an investment policy has components of it that dictate how you invest or how you take advantage of opportunities. Who are the counterparties? What's the process for go, no-go? Things like that. And that delay of action may result in losing that market opportunity. So it's very difficult to make decisions or give the agency to someone to make decisions on your behalf if you don't put this in place, if you don't make decisions first, right? If you don't say, this is how we're going to do it. If this opportunity comes up, then this is the process. It can be done incredibly quickly. We're giving the agency or the ability for our advisors to make decisions that benefit us, but we don't need to continually make those process decisions. The other thing that in the investment side that you see when there's a lack of decision and process is increased risk exposure, failure to rebalance, failure to have strategies that talk around, well, when this happens, then we do this. Rebalancing is a classic example. Overweights, underweights. You end up, if you don't have a system of rebalancing, we use that as an example, then you'll end up with potentially big overweight positions, or you don't know what you've got, like the exposure management piece. So even just things like rebalancing, things like that, they need these decisions to be made and to manage the risk effectively of that, right? Transaction risk, implementation risk, all these sort of things. Another one that pops up a lot on the investment side is liquidity. We talk about liquidity all the time in investment committees and things like that. It's around cash flow. What do we do with the distributions that might come from the business? What are we doing with distributions that are going out? What is, from a cash flow point of view, it's incredibly important to have that in place before going out and starting investing, because no one wants a liquidity crunch. And also, if it goes back to this missed opportunities thing, if there's not a cash flow process or decision making around cash flow, then it becomes very hard to take advantage of opportunities when they come to you, because again, no one can make decisions. If you can't make a decision, you're not going to be able to do anything. So, and you don't want to be a forced seller within these markets in particular. So, and as we saw, there's a bit of volatility, but we saw the global financial crisis and COVID and things like that. You don't want to be a forced seller into a dropping market because you need liquidity. So, having these processes and decisions in place is incredibly important. Counterparties. So that's one, that's two. This is third, counterparty. If you don't make decisions on your counterparties, and that could be things like, what's the review process look like? What is, if there's a new counterparty in place or an old counterparty in place that might require overview or review, as I said, then if you don't make that decision, you just go, well, I'm not making a choice here, I'm just going to let it go how it was, you will have misaligned partnerships. Failure to review wealth managers, asset managers, advisors leads to poor service, poor fee outcomes a lot of the time, and incentives that are potentially not aligned. That's a really important one. Like making sure that the incentives of your counterparties are in place. They're aligned with the family, aligned with, if you made a decision here on the documents like the investment policy and the values document, you can't then have a curated list or a list of counterparties that don't match it. You got to review it. There has to be decisions there as well. Not just we've been with them forever, we know them, they came to my kids, whatever. It's harsh sometimes, but if the counterparty or the advisor is not aligned, a decision needs to be made. The next one, high costs. I, as an ex-asset manager, know that one of the best questions a client can ask, or a consultant or whoever for that client can ask, is, what is the appropriate fee for this? Or I don't believe this is the appropriate fee. I believe the appropriate fee is this. And that's them making a decision to say, we're going to change it. Or if if the investment or the counterparty, again, like we talk about wealth managers and advisors, we got to review and we got to understand where the costs are. So a delayed renegotiation because they don't want to have that discussion, or they don't want to ruffle feathers, or whatever it ends up being, can mean high fees, high drag, potentially inappropriate as well, because one of those fee questions is always, well, what are we getting what we want to from this advisor or this counterparty? And, it does provide a good process of review and, to remove some of those unnecessary expenses as well. Not to say you have to review all the time, but just be aware that, and a good advisor or a good counterparty should cherish or should look forward to a review, because it gets them it gives them the opportunity to ask questions of the family office as well. I know that's what I do. That's what I intend to do, have those reviews of engagements just to make sure that we're still aligned, just to make sure, or actually, hang on, maybe we should do more, or maybe we should do less, or maybe this looks slightly different. Having that conversation is awesome. It's amazing to have, because it means that you're not looking for a total reset here, but you're just still making sure that you're aligned. And that goes for counterparties just as much as it goes for family offices. So the other one being regulatory and compliance risk. I mean, it is really important. Lack of, for another choice of words, proactive compliance, which means, you're looking at making sure that you're compliant and that everything is in place. And I know family offices aren't wealth managers and asset managers, right? So we don't have that level of compliance that we would if we had external money or external clients. But it's still really, really important to make sure that legal, tax, all these sorts of things, there's reputational risk associated with it. These are things, we might say compliance, but what it means is the family office looking at the risks of what they do and how they're viewed externally and by, government organisations as well. So they're really the big three. So, like I said, family, investments, and counterparty. Just some food for thought potentially. Like I said, I've been having conversations with families recently, and they're just really around sort of, well, how do we start having this conversation? So let's go through that now. What have I seen work? I've seen it work when the guiding principle has decided to change. Or not change, but decided that this is a process that maybe they shouldn't be the single point of decision making. The whole it's all up here is great, because let's be honest, a lot of the time the wealth is there because that person has made fantastic decisions. So it makes it quite understandable to say, well, we should just continue doing it that way. But one of the things you can do is to get them to start writing things down, articulating the way that they view the world, getting people to understand their investment process or the decision-making process. Tell the stories of the values, of what they'd like to see, what their legacy could be. Just having someone ask them to articulate these things can be a really good jumping off point. And it lends itself into the second one, which is the warm hand versus the cold hand, which sounds slightly macabre, but all I mean by that is if you can give instruction or articulate values and things like that whilst you're still around, then that's much better than relying on documentation and estate planning and things like that to try and ensure that it happens after you pass away. It's, in my experience anyway, when you see people start to move into that stage of life and start to increase the more collegial aspect of it, which is, I would like to impart my knowledge here. I would like people to be able to understand what I want here and here. It is incredibly powerful, and it does lean itself into next steps, the less qualitative components, and really getting dug into a bit more process, a bit more decision making. So warm hand versus cold hand is a very important part of it. Bringing people into the tent, shed, garage, onto the boat, whatever it looks like. And what I mean by that is bringing people in, as opposed to, all right, this is what we do, you guys can go now, we're doing this. Bring people into that. Even if you think that they might find it not very interesting or whatever, just asking them to join in is such a powerful thing. The eyes light up. Oh, excellent. I get to hang out with family. We get to make decisions, all these kinds of things. It's really, really powerful. So just bringing them into the tent, bringing them into the inner circle, such an important thing. Utilizing trusted advisors. It's another great one. It's just being able to lean on people or firms that can, or by the nature of their business model, assist with getting these decisions or these processes in place. Such a great thing. So and actually having someone external to the family and external to the executive potentially that sits within the family office that says, this is what you need to do, or this is what we recommend you do, is really powerful because it comes from a place of independence, especially if the incentive is aligned. You know what I mean? If they say do this, but there's transactions on the end of it or something like that, then look at that slightly differently. But if the incentives are correct, which is the outcome is beneficial for the family is the intention and advocacy is the intention, then I think having those trusted advisors that potentially sit outside of the family office structure is super, super helpful. Having hard conversations, number 5. Just no one lives forever, unfortunately. So having hard conversations has to happen. And unfortunately, well, I don't know about you, I don't like having hard conversations. I don't like having discussions around potentially people passing away or things changing, but it has to happen. And I would say that having those conversations sooner rather than later is going to be more helpful, because when the proverbial hits the fan in markets, or the person that holds a lot of the decision-making process passes away, then that's going to be a real challenge. Number 6, pragmatism. So, having the ability to give over power or giving other people the ability to chat, to make decisions is such a really important thing. You will, if you're pragmatic around this sort of stuff and you look at it from the point of view of, if we don't make decisions on counterparties, on, all this, on investments, on family, on stuff like that, it will end poorly. You might lose money, you might lose relationships. That's the risk. So be open to change. Number 7, make it fun. Sometimes these conversations can be fun. What are we going to do here? Make a plan. Here's the guide, especially from the family stuff. If you're making it fun and you're making people join in on the decision-making process, it can be fun. And giving people responsibility can be fun too. Low stakes, high stakes responsibility, it's up to you. But giving people responsibility and making that responsibility something they enjoy is a pleasure to see. And like my old boss used to always say, hope is not a plan. If you hope that things will change and go well and things like that, that's not a plan. So having a plan, just starting a plan, is such an important part. Just don't hope that things just all end up okay, because it might, but it might not. So that's some of the strategies, that's some of the thoughts that people are having around sort of the way to tackle this, I guess, what we'd call this decision paralysis, to get things moving. Above all, just talk to each other, get a conversation going. Get a conversation going when the stakes are low, not when the stakes are high. Like I said, when it's all gone pear-shaped, that is not the time to be having these decisions around decisions. It's about having these processes and procedures and trusted advisors and articulation of values in place, not when we're scrambling around. So that's it for this episode. Hopefully it was interesting. Like I said, it's a top of mind for a lot of people. I talk to a lot of people about it. I find it fascinating. Hopefully this is helpful. I know it's a challenging topic. If it was, make sure to alert and rate on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening to this podcast. If you're looking for more family office insights, be sure to join the thousands of other subscribers that are currently receiving the Sherpa newsletter every 2 weeks. And you can subscribe to that at hallroad, HALLROAD.com.au. It's in its 6th year. It's all these it's lots of information. It's quick. It's curated, but you can find a lot of information on there. You can find me on LinkedIn, and feel free to email me if you're a family office looking for an understanding of how I assist other offices. So Shaun, SHAUN, @hallroad.com.au. Till next time.